I think we might have some providers that aren't able to join due to the snow day, the weather. So we will be recording this just to let you guys know about that. So Justin, do you want to go ahead and do some updates? Do you want to share your screen, or do you just want to talk? What works for you?
So I don't have any slides. I don't have anything to present up on the screen.
Okay.
And maybe if it's all right, I can kind of give a really big picture update and then maybe turn it over to Chris Lucero from Denver Human Services, and then Orvalette or Ella or anyone else who can speak maybe more to today specifically, and the fact that we've got a snow day, and that if there's maybe a student who needs full-time care authorization, kind of what steps to take for that. They are experts there, but what I wanted just to spend a few minutes speaking to are the resources available, hopefully coming down from the federal level to the state of Colorado to support childcare, both through CCAP as well as through other programming. And so, I think one question I'd love to hear from providers: have providers started to receive the sustainability grants that the state had approved, I believe, late last year? Is that something providers have started to get revenue for, or not yet? Just curious kind of where the state is at. So that's not something we in Denver County are involved with in any way, but it's something the state is doing, I believe, for all licensed childcare providers. And so have any providers received sustainability grant funding from the state yet?
We haven't received ours yet, but in the latest email, it says by February 28th. It's
Okay.
expected.
So hopefully soon. Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else? Any other providers? Because I just don't know the details. I knew they were aiming to get it out in February, but wasn't sure kind of the cadence, or if it was going to be all at once or kind of on a rolling basis. But hopefully providers, to Rebecca's point, should be receiving that here by the end of the month. The additional state funding really intended to help providers keep their doors open. What I wanted to speak a little bit more to is additional funding that the state of Colorado received for childcare from the legislation that was passed late last year. And it's a little bit confusing because late last year, there was a $900 billion federal stimulus legislation that was passed. And so that legislation had about $10 billion in it for childcare. And then of that $10 billion total for childcare, about $122 million was earmarked for the state of Colorado. And so the state of Colorado, in order to receive this money by the end of the month, had to come up with a plan, or has to come up with a plan by the end of the month and submit it to the federal government. And so yesterday, so every month, the state of Colorado's Office of Early Childhood, they have a meeting with county finance people. So I go, finance people from Arapahoe County, from Douglas County, from many of the Colorado counties will go and kind of talk to the state, hear from the state about funding and how funding is going to be made available, how it's going to be allocated. And so there was one of these meetings back in January where they shared just a little teeny tiny tidbit of information about this $122 million that the state of Colorado expects to receive from this federal legislation that passed late last year. And at that meeting, that's where they said, we're looking at all sorts of different ways to program these dollars. I understand that not all of the dollars can go to CCAP. Some of the dollars just need to go broadly for licensed childcare providers. However, a significant portion of the funding is likely to go to CCAP. And so the state is looking at increased absence payments, additional provider sustainability grants, reducing parent fees. And what the state anticipates is that roughly $120 million will need to be spent by September of 2024. And so in other words, not all of that funding is going to be spent at once. it's going to be spent over time. And so at that meeting back in January was when the state said, and in order to get this money, we need to come up with a plan and submit it to the federal government by around the end of the month of February. And so yesterday, actually, there was supposed to be a meeting between counties and the state Office of Early Childhood to talk about CCAP funding. And at the last minute yesterday, that meeting got canceled. And so I suspect what's going on is the state is working really hard to develop that plan or idea of how it will spend the money. However, that information has not yet been shared publicly. And so counties aren't aware of anything. I'm not aware of anyone who is aware of anything, but hopefully in the next few weeks or the next month or so, because there was this deadline of the end of February for for the state to submit its proposal for how it would spend that money to the federal government, that the hope is the state will share with us and providers, early childhood councils, kind of what its thinking is, how maybe it will use that money. But that's really the update I wanted to share in terms of the funding that was already approved by Congress and the former president, and what's also on the table. And so that's just the funding that's already passed. The current president has a $1.9 trillion stimulus proposal, and it's a little bit opaque right now because that is still being negotiated. And so members of Congress, they're still kind of trying to lobby to get different things in there. But the expectation from what I've read about that $1.9 trillion stimulus legislation, which has not yet passed, but which is kind of being debated in Congress right now, is that would also, if it passes, include additional funding for childcare. And so that's something I'm keeping an eye on. And as soon as I have any updates, or as soon as maybe that legislation passes, I will keep this group appraised of hopefully additional funding that would become available for childcare generally, and for the Colorado Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP, specifically. And so not a lot of information, but some hopefully good news about more resources that will be coming to bear to help providers and to help families. And so I'd be happy to try to field any questions, although there's just a whole bunch we don't know yet at this point. Are there any questions? And I'm looking at the chat, or feel free to just go off of mute and speak up.
Justin, you might not know the answer to this, but I'm wondering about the PEBT program. So that's the program that gives families funding if they qualify for free or reduced meals during the school year where their children are not in school. So there was some funding that came out in May, I believe, of last year for the previous school year. And I know it's kind of in the works with that PEBT funding. I think the money's been there at the federal level, but I don't know if the state has submitted their plan to spend that money yet. And I'm hearing from providers that families are still kind of struggling with food, resource centers, those kinds of things. So I'm wondering if you've heard anything about that funding.
Dora, that's a great question. And the short answer is no, I haven't, but I was familiar with I think it was the pandemic EBT program that was in place last summer. And so I don't know. That's a great question. And let me follow up and see if I can get more detail on that, either from the state of Colorado or from my colleagues at Denver Human Services in some of the other divisions. And so I don't have an answer, but let me look into that and see what I can find out. Great question.
That would be great, because then we could definitely be informing providers to, encourage their families to apply for that.
Are there any other questions? So if not, maybe I can turn it over to others from Denver Human Services. And so I don't know, Ella or Chris, if either of you would want to speak to the communication that Denver Human Services just sent out to providers. I suspect one of you two would be more expert at that than I would be.
I can talk about it.
Thank you, Ella.
All of you should have gotten an email from us, or it was also sent out by, I believe, Dora this morning. That today obviously is, some schools are closed altogether and they're having a snow day. Some schools are closed for in-person learning and they're sending all their kids remote. So we sent out an email just letting providers know how to make sure they get covered for the care they provide. So if you have children who are normally in-person learning at the school and they're only authorized for part-time, but because the school is closed for in-person learning and they're only doing remote, and if the provider is watching the child full-time, that we have to get a request in writing from the parent. So they can just send us an email, but if it's easier to, we attach the change form that you can have parents sign just saying, I need full-time care for virtual learning for my child due to the school closure. If the school is completely closed, they're not even doing remote learning, then you refer to the unanticipated closure policy that was also sent out with it too. And that's a different process where the parents don't have to submit a form, but it's more through the provider payments team and manual billing. Chris, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would add is just to be making sure that you're looking at your ATS sign in and outs for verification of authorization timeframes. That way it would help you with knowing who needs to submit that change form. And also what we're seeing from the business office side is that we know there's been a lot of disconnect and a lot of misunderstanding of how a provider is going to get paid, both from a virtual standpoint, and between the part-time and the full-time. So anytime you're in doubt of what your client should be doing, always look at the authorizations in ATS to assure you know how many hours they are authorized for care. And if they're telling you, I should have full-time, but their authorization is showing part-time, my recommendation is always to have the client reach out to their casework to assure those notes get updated, because ATS is basically like real time. So if the authorization is showing part-time, that means that the client has not done the request yet, and that our program area hasn't been able to update those cases. So we really want you to be working really closely with your clients to assure that you are giving care for the time that they are authorized for care, because in a lot of cases, what we're seeing is that you as the providers are taking the children in on a full-time care basis, and the clients have not been authorized for full-time. So unfortunately, that's a disservice both to you and to the client, because a lot of times it's a financial burden on both sides. So from the business office standpoint, we always are saying, please really look at your ATS authorizations and reconcile timely, just so you don't get caught up months in the future saying, hey, I should have gotten paid full-time, but I only received part-time. Because at that point, it may be too late to even have a conversation of getting reimbursed.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ella. Are there any questions? Is there anything we can clarify from Denver Human Services for providers or for anyone on the call that might be helpful?
Like we have a couple people in this meeting that are kind of new to CCAP or kind of wondering how it works. Is there a way to just give like a 5-minute overview of like what this program is, how it works, where the funding comes from? Like not too detailed, but just in general, like what is CCAP about, or how does it work?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know, Ella, would you like to take that? You want me to take a stab at it?
How about you do the financial funding side and I'll talk about the program side.
Sounds good. Why don't you kick it off with the program side and then kick it to me and I'll talk finances.
Okay, so just a very general overview. CCAP is the Child Care Assistance Program. So we help low-income families who are in an eligible activity, and that can be going to school, working, or job searching, and we help subsidize the cost of childcare. And so obviously there's certain eligibility requirements they have to fulfill. There's income limits. They have to be in an eligible activity, like I said. And then they have to apply in the county they reside in. But that's just a very general overview. There's a low income CCAP side, but then also if a family is receiving TANF, they can also get CCAP, but that's through a different process. They go through their TANF case manager. And then the low income side, they apply directly through us.
So that's kind of on the programmatic side, how families come to Denver Human Services and apply for services. The way that CCAP is funded is the state of Colorado receives a lot of funding from the federal government through the Child Care Development Block Grant. And so some of that money, a lot of that money goes to providing childcare for families who might be low income. And so what providers are highly encouraged to do is to execute what we call a fiscal agreement with the county, with any county to whom they would like to provide care for children through CCAP. And so in Denver County, if you're perhaps new to CCAP, reach out to Chris, reach out to me. And if you would like a fiscal agreement, even if maybe there are no kids currently who are attending your facility who are already enrolled in CCAP, we can get that agreement in place. And that agreement will basically allow us to pay you if there's a family that is enrolled in CCAP and elects to attend your location for childcare. And so the way payments work is the payments are based on care attended. And so when you sign that fiscal agreement or contract with Denver Human Services, the state, it kind of sets the maximum rates for each different age band that it will pay. And so as part of the process whereby we execute a fiscal agreement, we look and see what's higher. Are the providers' private pay rates higher, or are these state rates higher? And unfortunately, in many cases, the private pay rates are higher than the maximum that the state is able to pay. And so in that case, even if the rates are higher, the state set maximum rates for each age band are what applies. But then every time a child attends care that's authorized through Ella and her team in the CCAP program area, the family will what we call PIN in or enter their PIN number, which verifies that they attended care that day. And then the provider, which provides that care, should be automatically paid through the child care automated tracking system or chats. And hopefully that's kind of how you get paid for providing that care. If for some reason you do not get paid as a provider for providing care, you also have the option of submitting to Chris and to me and to Denver Human Services what we call a manual claim. And so the manual claim is basically you as a provider saying, I provided care on this day, the family attended care on this day, but for some reason the system didn't automatically pay me. And then we in Denver County will kind of after the fact pay for that care that maybe wasn't automatically paid through the system. One last thing, and then I'll stop talking and get to some other agenda items. But you're probably thinking, well, that's pretty different than private pay, where families are probably paying maybe a monthly rate or a quarterly rate or something like that. And so what counties do, and each county is a little bit different because Colorado is a unique state in that the state just kind of sets the outlines of these different programs, and then counties, so Denver, Arapahoe County, Douglas County, Jefferson County, Adams County, et cetera, those counties kind of administer the program and get to set a lot of the different details of how they administer it themselves. But one of those county options is how many absences per month to pay. And so before COVID, Denver County would only pay typically one absence per month. Ever since COVID has hit, recognizing some of these huge attendance challenges that are facing families and providers alike, we've paid a significantly higher number of absences. And so what that means is, right now for the month of March, Denver Human Services is going to pay 10 absences per child per month. And so what that means is if a child is authorized for full-time care at your location, typically in a given month, there's 21 or 22 weekdays of care in that month. And so if maybe a child only attended 5 of those days, let's say, but for March, Denver Human Services is paying 10 absences, you as a provider would get paid not just for those 5 days of care that were attended, but those 5 days of care attended, plus the 10 absences for days that those families missed. And so the really big caveat there is that we are kind of changing potentially the number of absences that we can pay out per month based on what attendance is looking like and based on how much funding we have left through the end of the current state fiscal year. So that's probably enough to overload your brains. And if this is something you are interested in, Chris, if you would be so kind, and I'll do the same, but maybe just to put your email address or the provider payment, better yet, the provider payments inbox in the chat. And so if you're a provider who would like to execute a fiscal agreement with Denver County in order to provide CCAP care to families who are in Denver County, please reach out to this inbox and we will work with you to get a fiscal agreement in place. Even if maybe you don't have any kids today, this will allow them to hit the ground running and receive care lickety split when there are kids enrolled in CCAP looking to receive care from your location.
I would also add too that completing that fiscal agreement with Denver Human Services provides you access to CSQA funding, which is state funding for coaching, quality, if you want, shelves, or you need some kind of different, you can't buy consumables, but different things for your center, a curriculum, anything like that. Like, it does also open the door for funding for your program specifically that's not child-based. So it really does make you eligible for a lot of support services by serving CCAP children as well.
That's a huge point, Dara. Thank you for adding that. I missed that, but that's a huge, even if you're just a little bit on the fence about CCAP, get that fiscal agreement in place, make yourself eligible for that additional funding. And then if at some point you want to provide care to 1, 2, 3 kiddos enrolled in CCAP, try it out. We'd love to work with you.
Do any providers have any questions that they want to either put in the chat or on mute and ask? You guys can ask whatever you want.
Is that CSQA funding, is that a Denver thing, or would that be available in other counties as well?
That's state funding, so that's available no matter which county you're in. Generally, there are some caveats around what level you are. So when you get rated by the state, you'll become like a level 1 through a level 5. So depending on what rating level you're at, that can also determine some of the funding you get or how much you get. But once you have an open CCAP fiscal agreement, you do have access to that funding, no matter where you are.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Rebecca, I think you are located in Arapahoe County, correct? Yeah, so there's also an Arapahoe County Early Childhood Council, and like Arapahoe County has its own kind of CCAP system, and you'd use a fiscal through that county.
And providers rather can have fiscal agreements with multiple counties. And so we have a lot of kids who live in Denver who receive care in Arapahoe County or who receive care in Jefferson County. And so even though you're maybe not a provider who's located in Denver, you are still absolutely eligible to get a fiscal agreement in place with Denver. And so and many providers have fiscal agreements with multiple counties.
Any other questions for providers? Anything CCAP? We have all the people here. So if there's any CCAP questions, this is totally the place to ask the question. Okay. Any other questions about any of the things we've talked about? Snow days, manual billing, anything like that?
I think the only thing I'd add, sorry to interrupt, Dora, but is if any questions do come to mind, maybe you're getting ready for bed tonight and something pops into your brain about CCAP, feel free to reach out to the email address that Chris put into the chat, providerpayments@denvergov.org, and we'd be happy to try to help you out that way as well.
Thank you guys so much. We definitely appreciate you guys. Very insightful and eligible. Other partner updates. Marina, did you have any DPP updates you'd like to share?
Yeah, we have a couple of updates. So just very quickly, we're still working on our tuition credits for 2021, 2022, but we are committed to not reducing them. So they'll be the same or higher. And that should come out, I think, next month. But I'll say we're leaning probably to keeping it the same, considering all the things that are happening. But we're also really aware that enrollment is down and that providers can't capitalize really on tuition credits if you don't have kids there to show up. So we have also created a community provider support with extra funding. So if you remember, I think last March or April, we had an emergency fund with about $100,000 that went out to directly to providers sort of as a grant. Then we had a stability or strengthening grant. There we go. All these S words that are being thrown around, but a strengthening grant that had a little bit more money. I think that was $230,000. And we are planning on sending out some more community provider supports as a grant system with actually a little bit more money and investment than the strengthening grant. So we'll have more information about that in the coming weeks. And if you have any questions in the meantime, Chris Miller at chris@dpp.org will have more information about that. We still have our distance learning pilot going on. So it's a way to help providers kind of get that money and infusion of dollars to support a distance learning program. So we have infrastructure dollars to help every month with things like internet bills, very limited, but some FTE time for teachers, curriculum, if you have to pay for that, and platform services, money for that. But then we also have an individual student support for your distance learners. So providing, I think up to $280 for our lowest income families to access these distance learning programs if they're choosing to do distance learning instead of in person. So Chris Miller is also the person to contact for that if you're interested in learning how to participate and get your family signed up for that or your school signed up for that. And then the last is a really exciting thing for DPP, at least this month. Our board has approved us to start funding 3-year-olds. So I'm with the Denver preschool program. I should have said that up front. I'm very sorry. But we are now funding 3-year-olds. We normally only fund 4-year-olds, but we're going to start this next year. It will not be at this level as our 4-year-olds, and it won't be a universal program just quite yet while we pilot it, but it will be for a targeted amount of 3-year-olds, which we are thinking that it will start with our lowest income families. So 100% to 135% of the federal poverty line is where we'll start. So we don't have many details about that because we just got it approved and we have to hit the ground running to get to a launch in September, but we'll have that up and coming. And yes, Dora, yay. We have been planning for 3-year-olds since 2014 when we reauthorized for, to be a program here in Denver. So, and now it's 2021. So it's been a long time to get there, but we will be, we're starting to fund lower. So The other thing that the other sort of update is for the scholarship program that we have at DPP, which fully funds students who don't have access to CCAP or CPP for various reasons. We're fully funding the children that go up to 300% of the federal poverty line. So initially we were just giving full support to families who were at 185 of the federal poverty line and didn't have access to these other public funding. But now any family who is enrolled in our scholarship program will get the full preschool paid for. And just to kind of promote that, if you're not yet a GAP or a scholarship provider, we pay either to the cost of care, which has been calculated by us, or the published tuition rate, whichever is higher, so that we can really ensure that families get a $0 tuition bill, but also that providers can at least get up to the cost of care, because we know in a lot of these neighborhoods, what families can afford does not match what the cost of care is. And so without passing that cost on to families, we'll take on that burden to help get the child in care for at the rate of cost of care, not the market rate. So yeah, I mean, those are all the updates I think we have. And Justin, I will say, when we're talking about these 3-year-olds, it would be, I'm going to reach out to you so that we can make sure that we're appropriately funding kids at 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, but making sure that we can maximize our dollars to providers so that kids do have access, that it is affordable, and that providers are properly compensated for, honestly, the work that they do to helping us develop our youngest learners and get them ready for kindergarten.
I would love to connect, Marina. Let's
Yeah.
talk.
Awesome. I'm going to use your personal email though. I'm not.
That's all right. Yeah, feel free.
And I think that's it from us, Dora.
That was like the best update I've heard all day. Like that made my whole Thursday happy. I even put a little happy face on these minutes. Yes, it's exciting. Little things in life. Does anybody have any questions for Marina about DPP?
I'm full of questions.
Great.
To be eligible for DPP, you need one child that lives in Denver. We're like in the East Colfax corridor, but in Aurora. So we're
Yeah.
super close to Denver. So I imagine some of our children will eventually live in Denver. That's correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar to what Justin was saying. As long as you are serving a DPP student, then you can be a DPP provider. We have a little bit of different regulations, but those mostly are in our quality improvement section. So similar to CCAP, you could be eligible for certain or limited amounts of dollars that go to increasing quality at your school in various ways, like either coaching or supplies, things like that. But yes, as long as you have a DPP student, you can be a DPP provider.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Any other DPP questions? Okay. I would love to just hear from you guys. Is there any challenges or successes right now? How are things going? How's enrollment going? Is anyone struggling with anything? Is anyone super excited about something good that happened? Just to kind of check in with you guys. Like, how are things going? How are you guys feeling? Thoughts? Concerns? We're all just making it through our week this week? Is that where we're at? We all just want to go play in the snow? Okay. All right. Well, if you think of any successes or challenges you guys want to share, I'm always curious to kind of know like where you guys are at and how things are going for you guys. So with that said, we will have our next meeting date on April 22nd. We will only send out one link this time, although it's fun to hop around. We don't want to do that all the time. So just one link this time. But that will be the 4th Thursday in April on the 22nd. If you guys have any questions or anything comes up between then, or you want to talk about something related to CCAP or DPP or anything, let me know and we will put it on the agenda. Sound good? And then I will send out these meeting notes to our CCAP group as well. So you guys have these as well as the recording.
I just have a quick thing, Dora, is there's a few new faces in this group today. So I'm just wondering if everybody here is on our CCAP mailing list. And if you are not, or if you're not sure, would you mind typing in your email address in the chat and I can grab it and add you to our list?
Yes, that's a really good list to have. Especially if you want to know like CCAP updates, if anything's changing, changes to these meetings, like it's really good to be in the know with that. Okay, well, once you've left your email, you're free to go enjoy your day. Have a nice weekend. We only have one day left, so I'm going to skip to the weekend.
Thanks for answering all my questions.
Anytime. It's nice to see you, Rebecca.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks for coming, Lisa. Thanks, Archie.